Welcome back to Mr. Scare. We have become a horror community of 2,000 subscribers. Super thanks! And for today's episode, I have a compilation of 7 highway horror stories. But before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. This incident happened to me back when I worked as a manager at a certain chain of restaurants around 2014. We had to stay later than usual to clean flour and water stuck to the floor. It wasn't a rare occasion that we had to clean it up, as we generally had to do it every once a fortnight. I had a coworker who was kind enough to stay a little later to help close, in exchange for a ride home, which I willingly agreed to. We finished up our work and he was giving me directions on where to go, and I ended up driving to a part of town that I didn't recognize. Now I moved to this town a year ago, and I had explored it quite a bit. But this one was new to me. Or maybe I had been there before, but during the day, and hence the place seemed far from familiar in the middle of the night. The place had a lot of farmland and open fields, and that was common over here, so it didn't surprise me. But this vast stretch of farmland felt scarily empty. I kept driving in the direction he told me without any questions asked, mainly because I knew he was a nice guy. It must have been around 1:30 a.m. by the time I dropped him off at his place. I start taking the empty rural road back, feeling a bit sketched out. I was on the lookout for anyone lurking around. And as I got close to approaching the part of the road where the traffic lights were, that's when I noticed them. There was a whole group of around 10 or so people fist fighting in the middle of the road. They looked like the stereotypical description of Latino gang members. Long white shirts, mustaches, bald heads, you know, the typical look. Apart from the fact that I wondered why they were fighting at night on the road, the creepy thing that I noticed was that they all looked identical. It felt like I was watching clones fight amongst themselves. As I got closer to them, they all stopped fist fighting and turned to look at me, almost in sync. I was about 20 to 30 feet away from them, slowly inching forwards because I was obviously not planning on running over those people. They all looked like deer caught in the headlights. And then they all started running towards me. They dashed at a speed that shook me. It was as if they were all racing each other to see who could get to me first. I panicked immediately, swerved off the road, and drove around them. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that they quickly gave up on the idea of catching up to me. I made it out without injury or damage to my car, but from that point, I never offered rides to anyone from work. I told my colleague about last night's incident. He reacted as if I was bullshitting something. I mean, he literally laughed it off. When he noticed the look on my face, he asked me to narrate the entire incident again. I gave as many details as I could remember. He shook his head and said it was impossible. Latinos have never been seen in the town ever since he was born. It was a very small town. He also mentioned that the vast farmlands have always been empty. To this day, I am still confused about what I had seen that night. My only logical explanation is that the farmlands aren't abandoned. They are being used by a Latino gang to carry on their illegal business. I never mentioned this possible explanation to anyone, mainly because it even sounds like a made-up story that I saw 10 identical people fighting in the middle of the street that too at night. So I never brought it up again, or even went close to that part of the town. So before I tell you what I encountered, let me tell you that I live near to a park, and thus I have to drive by it every night when coming home from work. One Friday night, I was returning home as usual when I saw a little girl in a red dress, riding her bike in the parking lot next to the park, just going in the same circle, under the light of a street lamp. It looked odd to me, but I shrugged it off, as we all did stuff that looked weird as kids. And I had never had any creepy or spooky encounters here. Forget my experience, I had never even heard about it from anyone living around here. Then on Monday night though, I see the girl again, same red dress, riding her bike in the same way, but I observed that she looked older. I try to observe closely, but I just shrug it off, thinking I just didn't get as good a look the last time I saw her. On Tuesday night though, I start to really realize that something is up, as I saw a teenage girl wearing the same dress and riding in the exactly same manner was seen there. On Wednesday night, it was now a woman in her early 20s. The next night it looks like a woman pushing 40. At this point, I start to get really unnerved, and since Friday would be my last shift before a few days off, I considered taking a long way home just to avoid seeing this odd sight, but I told myself that I was being irrational and ended up driving home using the same way anyway. I kind of wish I didn't, as that night I swear I saw what looked like a pure black silhouette of the woman standing in the center of the street light as the bike went around her with no rider. Instantly, I turn away to look behind as a cold sweat overtakes me. Suddenly, I'm more scared that I can't see this thing anymore, so I turn back to where it was, and for the briefest moment I saw the woman looking to be in her 70s staring dead at me, her hair pure white and her eyes milky as if she was blind, but then I blink and the parking lot was empty. After that, I never saw anything like that again. But it scarred me forever. I never bothered to take that route ever again. Now it has been several years since that incident, and while a part of me wants to say that my mind has exaggerated the details of it, but I still get that same cold sweat thinking about it. I even spoke to a psychic friend of mine. She suggested that when such things happen, they are trying to reach out to us. Maybe to convey something. She also pointed out that if it wanted to harm me, it had ample opportunities. But it never did. So there must have been something that it wanted to tell or show. But the message was lost forever, as I never saw her again. I hope she found someone else who had the guts to be approached by a spirit without getting spooked. I have a memory of that one time when my 5 friends and I went to get some hot dogs for dinner. Once we were leaving the food truck after eating the hot dogs, we decided to drive across a creepy and weird neighborhood because it saved a little more time compared to the main streets that had a dozen traffic lights involved. A friend of mine was driving, and I was in the back seat with 2 other buddies. We got to the end of a block and stopped near the end despite there wasn't any stop sign. Now we actually could have just driven past that block because we didn't have a stop sign. But there was an old yellow school bus, which for some reason caused my friend to stop. The bus had its high beams on, so we couldn't see who was driving, but we all stared at it for a brief moment. The bus was not in our opposite direction, but perpendicular to us. There was a crossroad and it had stopped there because that road had a stop sign. We waited for the bus to pass. But the bus didn't move even after waiting for like over a minute. So my friend decided to keep moving straight towards home. The very instant when he started accelerating, the bus literally pushed bottom on the fuel pad and drove towards us as if he wanted to hit us. We all panicked and started screaming because he was going to actually crash into us, and it was going to be a big hit. And since we were pretty close, we knew that a crash was inevitable. My friend kind of moved the wheels to the side as much as he could, so as to get as much distance as possible to try to drive across the street before the bus hit us. Our wheels screeched as we barely managed to prevent the hit, but we got past the street without touching the bus. We just looked at each other for a few seconds thinking about what happened. We got out of the car to see what the fuck was wrong with the bus driver, just to find out it was gone. There was no sight of it, not even in the distance. Now, this was impossible because it was a very long block to have made it across it and taken a turn, that too in less than 10 seconds. We still believe that it was a ghost bus. And in hindsight, it did feel weird to see a school bus at that hour. Although the beam lights were on, they were extremely strong. It made it difficult to even look at the driver. And the backside of the bus was dark. I don't know what it was, but it was creepy as hell. My friend jokes that it was picking up stranded wizards and witches who were going to Hogwarts. When I was about 9 years old, I had a routine with my dad. I would go with my father to his office for a few hours during the week, and he would drive my brother and me back after dark. It was a one-way bendy path through the woods, with cliffs on either side of it. We never had any trouble there. It was mostly an isolated one. And by isolated, forget humans, we rarely even saw any animals there. The road was really narrow, and then in the middle, it got to the size of a normal 2-lane road, and then it became narrow again. Every night, Our drive would be going fine until we drove past the narrow road. Because at the end of that large part of the road where it would narrow again, I'd always see a dark figure standing there. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, let me inform you that I've always had issues with seeing things. I'm a little schizophrenic. So I assumed it was nothing other than a figment of my imagination, but it was still freaky. I don't know how to describe it properly, but it was a big black thing with white slits as eyes, and had no hands or feet. Maybe like a Minecraft character. I had told my father about it a long time before. My father would always tell me that it was probably a tree, but we wouldn't know it for sure because we were never there during the day. Our way to the office was different from our way of returning from it. So we always got there at that spot at night when the visibility wasn't so clear. Now we always ignored it until one night after about a year of us driving past it, because that night it moved from its position and it ran out in front of the car so quickly that we couldn't see it. My dad called it a black deer and left it alone. I could sense that he too wasn't so convinced by himself. The very next time he drove back through there, it was without my brother and me, and he went off the side of the road, down the cliff, and snapped a street light. He said he hit that black deer, but also claimed that that was in no way a deer. He said it stood on its back legs and almost looked like a very human. After that, we never went down that road for many years. But after a couple of years, I again had to use that road for my work, but I never saw it. The other day I was talking to my stepsister about the accident that my dad had had on that road. Mind you, I just said he swerved while driving, and I didn't say why. More than not wanted to scare her about that road, I did not want to scare myself about it. I told her about it and she said,
I always hated that road. There was always this big black thing standing there and watching me pass by.
A chill ran down my spine, and I never bothered to go through that route ever again. This happened when I was heading home from work at around 11:30 p.m. one night, and the road which I was taking transitioned to a country road after crossing over an interstate. On the right were a few houses and a recycling place, all of which were dark, desolate, and quiet. On the left of me was the huge food distribution center for all the grocery stores in that area. And that side was all lit up and still bustling with activity. I passed the center's gatehouse, and between me and the gatehouse was this shadow. There were no details to it, and there was nothing else that could be really seen there. It was just a human-shaped shadow that appeared to be completely covered in long shaggy fur. This thing was supposedly taller than my full-sized pickup truck too. For the non-American people, that truck's cab was taller than a full-grown man, and this shadowy thing that I saw was taller than the truck. It wasn't until a further half-mile down the road that I processed what I had seen. The other people in the truck saw it too. But we never saw it again. It was impossible for that shadow to have cast it over there. Just plainly unexplainable. But being a truck driver, this was just one of the many creepy shits that we have encountered. I remember another incident when I was coming home from the grocery store after work, and it was about just some minutes past midnight. I live out in the countryside, so the roads leading to my house really don't have any lights on them, and wild animals alongside or on the road are a common sight for us locals living here. I topped this rise, and right there was something. My first thought was that it must be a large raccoon or a possum, but I was not quite convinced about it. I slowed down to avoid hitting it, and it turned its head and looked at me. It had a human-like face, with a long snout instead of a nose, and its eyes were glowing yellow because of my headlights. It had long hair hanging down on either side of its face, long enough to nearly touch the road. My brain was trying to process and grasp whatever I was seeing in front of me. I tried to look more closely, and that's when I noted that I could see through it. Yes, I could actually see the road past its body. And except for its glowing eyes, it was all gray and shadowy, and I could see the path behind it, through its body. After a minute of staring at me, it ran off into the shadows of the ditch. And I never saw it again either. I did ask my family and neighbors about it. The ones of my age were unaware of it. But the adults and mainly the old people were visibly worried and hiding something. I did not prod much because I figured maybe it was best kept a secret. I used to drive a trailer for almost a decade. Some years back, I was on a run to pick up 4 cars on a trailer from Virginia and back to Iowa. I drove the entire way there without stopping, except for the usual bathroom breaks. I had planned on grabbing a motel room when I got there. I wanted a room so that I could have a good sleep and get refreshed before turning around to come back home. I mean, despite being a seasoned driver, it does get very exhausting after driving for hours at a stretch. I mean, the body usually gets accustomed, but not the mind. Long stretches of roads generally take a toll on the mind, and a good night's or afternoon's sleep does the trick. Now I wasn't tired when I got to the spot. I had drunk a few energy drinks during the trip, so I loaded up the cars and turned around, and figured I'd stop whenever I got tired. That way it would save some miles and shorten the journey for the next day. So I kept driving until got pretty late at night. I was driving through the mountains of West Virginia and starting to get tired and sleepy. I was on the lookout for a motel, but I didn't see anywhere to stop for a while that didn't look too shady. My eyes were shutting as I was getting a little drowsy. All of a sudden, I see a person crawl up out of the ditch on the side and lay down on the side of the road. I'm doing 70 or so with 3 cars on a trailer and going down a mountain, so I couldn't exactly slam on my brakes or anything. I did the best that I could do in that situation, which was just dialing 911. I kept my phone on speaker as I kept driving my trailer. I told the cops, "I don't know if I've just been awake too long or what, but I'm pretty sure I just saw someone climb up onto the road from the ditch. It was too real to be a hallucination." The cops said that they would check it out and that they were getting the same call from a couple of other people. I was surprised because there were hardly any other cars on the road. But on the other hand, I was glad that I wasn't hallucinating. But it was getting late. So I decided that I would stop at the next exit and find somewhere to stay. The next morning, I turned on the news in the hotel, and it said that a guy had crashed his motorcycle a day earlier, and barely alive, he had climbed up to the road. Sadly, he had died as soon as he had made his way up there. Now I was feeling bad for the guy when it struck me that when I saw him, he was alive and moving. But the news channel reported that he had died a day earlier. How was it even possible? Was it a ghost that I had seen? And not just me, a considerable number of travelers had seen him. I belong from the northeastern part of Pennsylvania, far into the Appalachian wilderness. There is a marsh not so far from where I live, which is locally notorious for having a large black mountain lion living in it. Let me be very clear that not me, but almost everyone from out of my town says mountain lions don't live in Pennsylvania, but several people in my town have reported it, including local wildlife experts. Now I don't know how I feel about it, but it scares me just the same as others residing here. I have never seen it. But if there's a possibility of it existing, then I need to be cautious. I was driving home one night late from work and decided to take my old Hyundai Sonata through the marsh road instead of the slower way through the town. On either side of the road, tall cattails blocked vision beyond about 15 to 20 feet. At the edge of my lights, I saw something slink across the road, and at first, I assumed that it was a dog. So I pulled up to where it entered the reeds, rolled down my window, and called out to it, saying something along the lines of,
"Hey boy, come here."
I heard a deep growl followed by a terrifying shrieking noise. Then I saw a pair of eyes reflecting in the bushes, walking toward my car. I gunned the gas and drove the rest of the way home without stopping. I don't know what I saw or heard that night. I suppose that it could have been a few different animals making noises at the same time. But I've hunted for years and I know what bears, foxes, coyotes, and most other wild animals sound like, and it didn't sound like any of those. I've always told everyone that I had seen the infamous black cat that night, but in all honesty, I don't know. I don't walk unarmed through that part of the marsh anymore though. But those eyes had stared right into my soul, and the growl made my heart stop beating for a moment. It could have just pounced over at my car and shattered the glass. But maybe it didn't want to. All it wanted to do was announce his presence. After all, we were residing in his territory.